Hey guys, it's Julia. Welcome back to my channel and welcome back to the color series. It's been a year since I've done a color series video, and I'm realizing that a lot of you guys actually found my channel through my color series videos. Basically, these videos were where I would take a single color and go through my favorite and least favorite eyeshadows in that color. So it started off with yellows, just because yellows are a particularly difficult color to formulate and really hard to find good yellow eyeshadows. I did all the colors in the rainbow. I believe I finished off with pink, and then I haven't done a color series video since. So it's been about a year since I've done one of these videos, and I've had a lot of requests to do an updated version of the color series, but honestly, I really wouldn't have anything super new to update it with. I still stand behind all my reviews in those videos, and for the most part, besides like the ColourPop Honey palette, which is obviously like my favorite yellows now, those videos I still stand behind and are pretty accurate. So an updated color series is not really in the cards right now, but there is a big glaring gap in the color series right now, and that's because I never covered whites, blacks, and neutrals, because I didn't really think of them as colors. But white and black are particularly difficult colors of eyeshadow to make, and personally for me, I have tried many awful white and black eyeshadows in my time and also found some really good ones. But that would be a really short video, and also because those are kind of basics and staple colors to have, I also want to talk about my favorite neutral shadows. This video is going to be all mattes, so black, white, and neutral mattes. I'll be including my favorites in these categories as well as a few that you might want to avoid just because I've had particularly awful experiences with them. Welcome back to the color series. It's been a while. Starting off with black eyeshadows, I have tried a lot of black eyeshadow. Even though I don't really do a ton of like super dark eye looks, I use black eyeshadow very frequently. Using a black shadow to kind of do a nice smoky wing is one of my favorite things. But just in general, having a good black matte in your collection is just such a good versatile thing. The main problem I have with a lot of blacks is that they can be really patchy. A good black matte, for me, contains a lot of pigmentation but is still really easy to blend, and a lot of brands kind of deliver on one or the other. They either make a black shadow that's really easy to blend but fades really easily from the eyes, or that has a ton of pigmentation but is nearly impossible to blend out. So I'm really picky when it comes to black matte eyeshadows, but by far my favorite in my collection is from Melt Cosmetics. This is the Gemini palette, and it houses my favorite black in my collection, which is Bonnie. This shadow is basically everything I want out of a black matte. It has an almost like kind of creamy texture to it. But for that reason, I really love using this one as a nice smoked out liner because it has so much pigmentation. It's a really nice deep true black, but it blends out and it doesn't turn gray on the edges. It truly retains that nice depth of color while still diffusing really easily. While I don't always rely on swatches to tell the whole story, I think this black truly shines through in pigmentation and swatches. It's just glorious on the eyes. Even if I'm using like a different palette, I'll usually reach in here to use Bonnie because it's just my favorite black to work with. By the way, because this video encompasses blacks, whites, and neutrals, you will see the same palettes in different categories throughout the video, but you'll see this later. And then in second place for my favorite black, and this one you can actually get in a single, is from Anastasia Beverly Hills. This is my Soft Glam palette, and in here we have the shade Noir, which you can get in a single shadow for, I believe, $12. I would say this one is a little bit more powdery than Bonnie from the Gemini palette. Melt's formula I feel like is a little bit more creamy and has a little bit less kick up, whereas the Anastasia formula does tend to be more powdery, but it's still really pigmented and still very easy to blend. Noir is just perfect. I've never had any problems blending this one out. It's also really nice for deepening up shadows without making them look completely black. And if you're wanting a really good black matte single, I think that Noir from Anastasia is one of the best options. You're gonna see this palette later on in a less positive light, but the Morphe and James Charles palette also has one of my favorite blacks in here, and that is the shade here called Spooky. This is an excellent quality black. I don't typically love Morphe's darker shadows, but this one they really hit it out of the park with this formulation. In particular, I find this one really easy to get a nice diffused, blended out look. So I would say this black is not quite as pigmented as the Anastasia or the Melt one. It's still really dark and pigmented, but it's buildable enough that I feel like if you've never worked with a black shadow before and you want to just get an arsenal of shadows to play around with, I think this is a great option. But even once you've kind of like progressed beyond the beginner level, I still think this continues to be a really good formulation of black to work with. Spooky is great, and again, because it's kind of buildable, I find that this is really easy to layer with the other shadows in this palette to deepen them up. So for example, Cola, which is kind of like a dark blue but not quite navy, I can mix with Spooky and get a nice true navy blue. And I think that's a really unique quality to find in shadows, so you can kind of layer them to get different dimensions out of them. The Sosu by Suzanne Jackson and Kaylee MUA Urban Bible palette is another one of my favorites. The black in here is called Sin. This one is one of my favorites for using for a liner. It's also very close to the Melt Bonnie formula, honestly. So if you're in the UK, for example, and it's difficult to get Melt, I think this could be a really great alternative. But but I love this palette. I think the formula in here is one of my favorites from an indie brand. And this formula in particular, I feel like really lends itself to doing more artistic looks. And just in general, I'm really impressed with the black in here. Honorable mention, I know this video is only supposed to be mattes, but I want to talk about the black shade in the Kaleidos Features in 3 palette. So right here, right up here, there's a black and it has a little bit of silver micro glitter running through it. I vehemently hate mattes with micro glitter in them, but black with micro glitter is the only matte with micro glitter that I will tolerate. I think having a little bit of shimmer running through blacks not only helps them be a little bit more pigmented and creamy, just because shimmers can help to loosen up the formula and get it to be a little bit more like creamy and blendable. I think it also adds just such a nice touch of dimension that makes the black look really unique on the eyes. So for example, if I'm using this one as a kind of like nice powder liner, I feel like the tiny dispersion of like little iridescent shimmery flecks throughout it doesn't necessarily make it less neutral or less wearable, but just gives a little bit of extra dimension and extra je ne sais quoi. So this in particular, if I want a little bit of extra dimension to my black eyeshadow, is my favorite thing to go for. So those are my black eyeshadows, but I am even more picky when it comes to white eyeshadow. I dislike probably like a good 80% of the white eyeshadows I've ever tried out. So my category of whites that I like is 2 shadows long. My favorite white in my collection is from Sugarpill, and it's the shade here called Taco. Of all the Sugarpill singles that I have, I think I would recommend Taco and Buttercup Cake the most, just because these 2 shades, it's really hard to find really good formulations of these particular colors. Taco swatches so awful. That's the thing with whites, is a lot of the time, because they're white, the formulation is just naturally like chalky. That's the reason a lot of pastel eyeshadows are really bad, because they have such a strong white base that they naturally just look really chalky and bad on the eyes. Taco delivers that brightness. It delivers that white true color. It delivers. But it doesn't look like you put baby powder on your eyes. So you will see that Taco swatches really awfully. Most of the whites in this video are going to, but I think for Sugarpill shadows, you really don't see how good they are until you use them on the eyes and just see how they perform. Taco is great. I do like the black from Sugarpill as well, but not enough to mention it in my favorite blacks because I'm very picky. Gotta bring in the Urban Bible palette again, because the white in here called Veil, also really, really good. I'm not shocked that the white in here is good, because the person who made this, Kaylee, she uses white in her Instagram makeup looks all the time. And I think, especially if you're doing the type of makeup that she does, you need a really good white that layers really well with things and doesn't make your finished eye look crepey and gross. Veil, I think, is the perfect name because it delivers like an actual nice white shade, but you don't really need a thick layer. You just need a tiny veil of it to give you that white shadow. So you don't need to pack this one on and make it look really thick and gross to get a nice opaque white shade. So if you're wanting a good white within a palette, I think this one is a great thing to go for, but if you're just wanting a good single white to add to your collection, I would go for Taco. And now for one of my least favorite white shades. I told you you'd see the James Charles palette again, and I wanted to talk about the white shade in this palette. It's lovingly dubbed Flashback after Flashback Mary, which I think is very fitting because this looks like chalk. This not performing really well was kind of shocking to me, just because I really enjoyed how the black performed in here. But this, I feel like they tried to do a kind of similar thing that they did with the black and make it not super pigmented. So this one, you have to build a lot to get an actual like opaque white shade, and by the time you built it up, it just looks really powdery and really gross. So if you were gonna go for the James Charles palette to get a good white, I wouldn't recommend it, but I think the black in here is good. So it's kind of a mixed bag. This is probably my least favorite shade in the palette, and definitely something I don't use. And I want to finish off the category with this one because technically it's not really a white, but I wanted to still mention it. Another Anastasia Beverly Hills shadow that's available in single form as well is Tempera. It's in the Modern Renaissance palette, one of the most used shadows in my collection, as you can see, and it's also in the Soft Glam palette, so you can get it in either one of these or in single form. This shadow is truly such a good secret weapon for me, such a good neutral like bone shade, almost white, but a little bit of beigeness in there, so I feel like it actually looks a little bit more natural. It's not matte, but it's also not shimmery either. I would just define this as a really nice brightening shade. So I have it on my lids right now to do a kind of fully matte look that has a little bit of brightness on the lid. This is also really good as a shimmer-free brow bone highlighter or an inner corner highlighter. I feel like white can look sometimes really weird and just kind of clash with the rest of the browns I have on my eyes, whereas Tempera has that nice amount of beigeness to it, so it just looks natural. So those are my favorite black and white shades, and now neutrals. I really wasn't sure how to break this up because there are so many different families of neutrals. You have your true like brown neutrals, and then you have your kind of pinky tone neutrals, and your like orange warm tone neutrals, and your mustardy yellow tone neutrals. So I broke it up by family. Starting off with true neutrals, these are like the classic browns. They're not too warm or not too cool toned either. They're just like right in the middle. Probably the best example I have is this trio from Kaja. It's the Chocolate Dahlia Beauty Bento Trio. I have this kind of just true neutral mid-tone brown shade. For me, this is a really good transition shade, and then I have a nice chocolatey brown shade as well, and for me this does a really great job of adding dimension to the outer corner without overwhelming the eye look. I really enjoy the Kaja Matte formula. I wasn't sure I was going to. It's because I love their Beauty Bento shimmer formula a lot, and I feel like it's a really special, very like glittery formula, but I really wasn't sure how the mattes were going to be. But the Chocolate Dahlia is my favorite neutral, like tiny capsule palette on the go, and this entire thing is just like everything I need to create like my ideal neutral eye look. The Morphe Jaclyn Hill palette is something I've grown to love a lot for its neutrals. You have a lot of different color families in here. Obviously you have some like warm tones, kind of covers the 35-0 territory, but there are some of my favorite like truly neutral shades in here. So up here is one of my favorite transition shades on me, and transition shades are obviously relative. What might be a transition shade for me might be like a lid shade for somebody else, and I hate the idea that when people say transition shades they mean like beiges like this, because that's not going to be a transition for everybody. But for me, this is my ideal transition shade, just because it's like a little bit slightly darker than my natural skin tone, but actually gives dimension to my crease without looking like super dark. So Silk Cream is one of my favorite neutrals, as well as the shade down here called Buns, which is a little bit of a darker shade but still works as a transition. Silk Cream is kind of like a blonde coffee with a lot of cream in it, whereas Buns down here kind of has a tiny hint of mauve to it but still looks brown on the eyes, so I still define this one as a true neutral. And then another one of my favorite shades in here is called Chip, and this is like my favorite true chocolatey brown. It's brown but it has this tiny like eggplantish undertone, and I don't know if that description makes sense to everybody, but it's like, it's just this true dark chocolate. It's so good on the eyes, and I like the formula in here for the mattes a lot. So I recently did a very like bridal neutral look with all three of those shades I just mentioned. I'll flash it on screen, but I really love those three shades in here. When it comes to doing neutrals and soft glams, ABH is just like usually my go-to brand for that, and Modern Renaissance has two of my favorite shades. So Burnt Orange is one of my favorite kind of true neutrals. This one can edge more to the warm tone neutral side if you pair it with, for example, like Realgar. It can kind of take on a more orangey tone, but Burnt Orange I'm wearing in my crease right now as my transition shade. It's maybe just because I have a very yellow undertone, but on me it just looks like a true neutral. I also love Cypress Umber. Somewhat enjoy using dark browns a little bit more than using a dark black for liner, just because I feel like brown can look a little bit more natural and just work really nicely with a neutral eye look. So I'm also wearing Cypress Umber a little bit on my outer corner right now, but Cypress Umber and Burnt Orange are both in the Soft Glam palette as well. So you got Burnt Orange, Cypress Umber, Noir, and Tempera, so honestly you could just get the Soft Glam palette over the Modern Renaissance. I also want to talk about Mulberry in the Soft Glam palette. I mentioned the shade in my reds video because it is technically like a burgundy, kind of like maroon red. This for me toes the line between red and brown, and that's why I love it so much. It just brings this really deep richness to an eye look. Because it has this kind of reddish tone, it can really skew either way, and this is like by far one of my favorite shades in my collection. I also want to mention Credit in the Jackie Aina palette. This shade is actually really similar to Chip from the Jaclyn Hill palette. It's a nice deep chocolatey brown, but it again has that kind of like eggplant, almost like purplish reddish undertone to it. It looks so good on the outer corner. In theory it seems like it'd be similar to Cypress Umber, but this one I feel like it just has a little bit of extra like warmth. I don't know, I'm getting really passionate and excited about describing the differences between brown eyeshadows. I think I might be going crazy, but yes. Another great option if you're wanting really nice, good, true neutrals, as well as some fun, more colorful shades, is the Dose of Colors Foundation palette. Three of my favorite brown shades in here. We have Necessary, Cheens, and Churro, which is a gorgeous, accurate name for the shade. I really like the Dose of Colors eyeshadow formula, and in particular I think the matte formula is perfect for neutral shades. It's just like a really easy formula to blend out. I feel like you don't really have to put a ton of work into blending out these shades, which is good for just true neutrals. So I don't really want to spend a ton of time working on blending out a brown bronzer type shade. Churro is obviously a bit more of a warmer tone neutral, but these two are just good true neutrals, and I just love this palette a lot. And then last up in the true neutrals category is the Noble Soul Blooming palette. This has two of my favorite good neutral shades in here. Middle Karma, which is kind of an interesting name that I don't really know what it means, but a really lovely matte. This also has a tiny bit of like a mauve undertone to it, so it can pair really nicely with the pinks in here. And then Caravaggio down here in the bottom right corner. This is such a dark brown that it almost looks black on the eyes. This is Java, like coffee bean brown. Noble's formula is kind of like Anastasia and Melt combined. It has the pigmentation and the easy blendability of Anastasia with the kind of creaminess of Melt, so it's not as powdery as Anastasia's formula, I would say. So I really like using this one as liner, as well as a nice deepening outer corner shade, and Soul Blooming is great for neutrals. I do love me some good pinky tone neutrals. Honestly, I feel like I use pinky tone neutrals even more often. ColourPop Blush Crush palette is something I wouldn't have bought on my own, but now that I have it, it's become one of my favorite for pinky tone neutral looks. Two shades that I love in here, Cheek to Cheek and Made You Blush. Made You Blush does have a little bit of micro glitter in it, which is Not my favorite, however, it's not quite as strong as the Sailor Moon palette, which I despised, and I feel like you really cannot see it in the crease when you blend it out. So for me, I qualify this one as a true matte. But yeah, these two are beautiful for doing a nice pinky toned soft glam. I use this one in my Valentine's Day tutorial, and I just love this palette a lot. Also, Lovesick, kind of similar idea to Tempera from Anastasia. So if you're wanting a cheaper alternative, this entire palette is $12, whereas a single of Tempera is $12. What's that? Her again? Kaleidos Futures in 3. Wow. It's almost like I like this palette or something. This palette made me look at cool tone neutrals and just cool tones in general in a different light. I love these two kind of like mauve tone shades down here. These for me are really good transition shades. I can do pink looks with these if I pair them with the kind of berry tone shade in here. But if I want to do like a neutral look, I can pair this with browns and they kind of skew towards the like cool toned mauvey brownish side, which I really like. This is my favorite of the permanent Kaleidos Futurism palettes. I know a lot of people really enjoy the green one, and even though the Futurism 2 is like a neutrals palette, this I think gives me those neutrals but in a different way. Huda Beauty New Nude, obviously. This palette is the CEO of like mauve tone neutrals. Secret and Tickle are really beautiful, kind of pinky toned but still look really nice with like browns as well. Teddy is also lovely. You know what? All the mattes in here are gorgeous, but these 3 shades here are like my favorite. Just in general, this is a palette that I get complimented on a lot when I wear it on my eyes, and I would definitely say that Huda's big palettes are far superior to her smaller ones in terms of formula, but also I just like the way she puts together color stories. And then last but not least, my personal soft spot is for mustardy tone neutrals. So the Melt Gemini palette makes her return, and I think the 420 palette also has some really beautiful yellow toned like mustardy neutrals if you want a more expanded version of that. But the neutral side of this palette in particular, I love. I wanted to obviously talk about Lorelei because oh my god. The shade is everything I've ever wanted in a mustardy tone neutral matte. This is so good. I feel like mustardy tone neutrals need to be more popular than they are because you can wear them in a neutral context, but it just has a little bit of uniqueness to it and just je ne sais quoi. And then if you want Lorelei but expanded into an entire color story, Naked Honey. I love this palette so much. My favorite shades in here are Keeper, which is this kind of, it looks like Lorelei basically. And then Drip up here, also really nice. What I would define as a milk chocolate shade, and I haven't had milk chocolate in a while because my intestines could never. But this entire color story, delicious. I love the Urban Decay new matte formula. I feel like beginners could get away with using this type of palette, but you still have a nice amount of pigmentation and blendability, and I love this palette. Alright guys, that is it for the color series, whites, blacks, and neutrals. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. It's been a long time since I filmed a color series video, and I forgot how much fun these were, but also how much goddamn work they are. I have to swatch all these shadows now. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this one. It's been a long time coming. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. Make sure you're subscribed down below. Follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and the Tickety Talk. And if you made it to the very end of this video, you get the bonus meme. Love you. Turning 19 on Friday. Bye.
Your intrepid hacker found you a match to the other set in the database. His name is James Charles. He's a local guidance counselor.